Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Hello, I would be Tammi Mack. So Black culture has always had the biggest influence on mainstream media. And because of that dominance, it has given some people what they believe to be a pass to copy us, steal from us, and even use words and terms that we have embraced and internalized as being our own that they know they have no damn well reason for using it. One of the biggest offenses is the use of the N-word, an ethnic slur with an ugly history that has been reborn by removing the ER and replacing it with an A, turning it into a word of endearment. So let's talk about it. Who should or should not get a pass to say the N-word, or should we be saying it at all? Please welcome Public School District Director Sam Coleman. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Tammi, how you doing?
Attorney and author LeGrand Clegg. Hi, Attorney Clegg. Television and radio personality Don Amici. What's up, Don? And actor and comedian Teron Von Gossery. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Tammi Mack.
Hey.
Okay, everybody's there. All right, I'm just making sure.
I love the show. Couldn't wait.
I love on the show. I love the show.
So y'all are killing me. I have to say the first question on the business of being Black is why? Why should Black people care? Why should Black people care about the N-word at all, Attorney Clegg?
Well, it has a very negative history. It was the word that was used when we were kidnapped from Africa, when we were sold on the block, when they lynched us, when they raped our mothers, when they bombed churches, when they massacred us in Tulsa and other cities. It has a horrendous history. And what is interesting is that we're not the only group in America that has had a negative name attached to it. Italians, Jews, Irish, Japanese, Mexicans, and so forth. But we are the only group that flaunts it. And I think it's an absolute disgrace, and I don't think it should be used at all.
Teron, why should Black people care about the N-word?
Black people should care because nobody's out there trying to say the other racial slurs and making it cool. Black people should care because of the history of cultural appropriation. But at the same time, when we use it so profusely, we should know it's probably going to get used. People can say it. I just don't want them to want to.
Oh, Sam, why? Why should Black people care about the N-word and who uses it?
So I think it's Black people's business to require that we're treated with dignity and respect. And I think anytime anybody uses a word or a reference to dehumanize or rob Black people of our dignity, that it is our business to care and have a stance on it. And so I certainly care. I certainly have a position on it. And I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Don Amici, why?
I mean, very simple. Do you consider yourself a nigga or a nigger? I mean, when you look deep into the mirror and look down inside, is that where you look at yourself and you think and believe about yourself? And if it's not, you shouldn't really care. That's their problem if they want to use it. Matter of fact, I give it to them with grace. Have at it. Call all the white people the N-word all you want.
Interesting take. I like that. What goes through your mind when you hear the N-word, Don?
They're not talking about me. And even if somebody were to call me the N-word, I know and who I am as an individual, and it doesn't really matter to me. It just lets me know, and I appreciate when they use it, that they're bigot, that they're prejudiced, that they're racist. And I would rather see that openly than people hide it behind closed doors. And also, culturally, the N-word has become this in term of endearment, not amongst Black people. I think that's kind of where it started, and that's how we flip things. But also, it's moving into white culture. I've seen more white boys use the GA version of the N-word than Black people and Latinos. I mean, so let them have it.
It's interesting you say that, you like them to use the word because then you know who they are. And I think that has happened within the last 2 years and certainly within this last administration. I'd be wanting to play the song "Who Let Them Dogs Out" because I'm telling you, they all came out when Trump became president. There's no doubt about that. It's pretty easy to detect who cares about Black people and who doesn't care about Black people. Teron, I want to know what goes through your mind when you hear the N-word.
So as a comedian, let me bring up this skit by Lean and Cuisine, where it's the first Black person, they just put it out a couple weeks ago, it's the first Black person to use the word nigga and how it was reclaiming the word. Now, what goes through my mind is what's different, is very different than what goes through Attorney Clegg's mind because of our age and generational gap and what the word has meant to me traditionally. To me, it means friend. To me, it means my boy. To me, it means something that I say in frustration or not. It's a word that I use. It's a colloquial slang word. To Attorney Clegg, it meant way more danger than it meant to me.
Attorney Clegg, let's talk about that. Tehran has a point here. It is a generational difference between the definition of the N-word. I mean, if you've never been around to see the civil rights movement, if you've never been around to know what segregation and Jim Crow is all about from a personal aspect, and you've only been around to hear rappers use that word as a term of endearment and to reverse its meaning, and that's all you know about that word, doesn't it give a different sense of whether you should use it or not, Attorney?
I certainly appreciate the perspective of Tehran, and I like to hear young people express how they view the word. When I was growing up, as you're saying, Tammi, it was forbidden for us to use it in the home. Our ministers did not use it. Our teachers didn't. My aunts and uncles didn't. And if we used it, we would be reprimanded. It was largely because they had come to, I live in Los Angeles. They'd come to Los Angeles from the South, and they had experienced the lynchings. They had experienced seeing Black men burnt to a crisp hanging on a tree. My mother told me about when they would lynch Black men, they tied them at the end of the car and then drag them to the community so that we could see it, and they would use the word. What troubles me about it, as I said earlier, is that today, well, I did not say this, someone else did, but I want to add to that, that today you have, as the young man, I think it's Mr. Coleman, made the comment that in Latinos, white,
Oh, that was Don said even Latinos use it. Yes.
Yes, it's used consistently. Now, the problem is that anything subject to those multiple interpretations, which has this horrendous history, we should be very careful about what it could devolve to. And I use the word devolve because as I sit back and observe what's happened, I graduated from law school in 1969. And for the past 50 years, there's been kind of what I call an interval during which we've enjoyed a lot of freedoms that my parents did not have. They were victims of terrorism, et cetera, lynchings and the segregation, all that. But our young people don't realize how quickly things can change. Notice how after Trump, whites have become emboldened and begun to use words and say things that are very negative toward us. We never thought we'd hear. And so my concern is that you cannot just assume that because it may be a term, I might say, you little nigger, something like that in a term of endearment, that others feel that way. We have to be concerned about how we're viewed around the world because we live in a world that views us in various ways. And so I do respect Tehran's perspective and so forth and so on, but I think that it's our obligation as older people to give our young people the history of the word. And once they have a good, clear understanding of that, if they feel that they should still use it.
Mm-hmm. Don Amici, he was speaking to you a little bit when he said, hey, look, I understand that maybe they're taking the word back. Do you think there's a such thing as taking something back and
I think once that genie is out of the bottle, it's very hard to put that back in. And, speaking to the point about white people feeling emboldened after Trump, I think they've always been emboldened. They just, they've always felt this way. Trump just made it okay for them to say it out loud, which I appreciate because it lets me know that they're not hidden anymore and I can see where they're at.
I think that's what Attorney Clegg was getting at when he said they've been emboldened. Like they are now okay with saying whatever they want to say out loud as opposed to suppressing it. Sam, do you use the N-word?
I don't use the N-word, and something that Attorney Clay struck me, and I have to just reiterate that, is I don't use the N-word because I didn't experience terrorism in the way that my ancestors did, but I know my history because I was exposed to teaching about the violence of the N-word, about the connotation that comes with the N-word. And so because I went to a school and grew up in a household, my grandparents were from Kosciuszko, Mississippi. And so I got Kosciuszko, Mississippi type of instruction about the language I should and shouldn't use when I refer to myself, to my peers, and to my people. And so because I know better, I don't use the N-word. But there's a whole lot of folks who don't know the history, who don't know the ugliness and the hatred behind the word. And so I think then go forth and use it without that knowledge.
But you say that Black people should get a pass on the N-word, huh?
I don't think that Black people should get a pass on the N-word. I think that we should be absolved from consequences. I think we should know better, we should do better, but I don't think we should be fired from our jobs or ridiculed publicly if we use a word that is endeared within our culture. But that's one Black man's opinion.
Well, we're going to hear the rest of these Black men's opinion when we return on The Business of Being Black on Fox Soul. Welcome back to Business of Being Black. I'm Tammi Mack. Hi, everybody. So the business of being Black today is the N-word. Yeah, that would be the business of being Black, wouldn't it? So is there any difference between the usage of that word when it comes to the end letters? I always hate when people make a distinction between the A and the ER. I mean, to me, it just is what it is. And whether you have an ER attached to it or A attached to it, whatever your implication is for the word is what it is. Whatever your intention of the word is, it is what it is, regardless of what you put at the end of the word. But hey, as just one woman's opinion, one Black woman's opinion, I'd like to know your opinion, Teron.
My opinion is that the A and ER does make a difference. It comes through intent. It comes through.
Ah, come on.
I'm letting you know. This is what I mean. So, for example, we have words that start with the letter B. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but the letter B word that a lot of women use towards each other, and then you add a little "ach" and it becomes biatch. It becomes something you can say on public television. It softens the blow. What's in a word? Everything. So I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, but don't you think the intent, regardless of whether, like, I can't assume that just because you use the A behind it, your intention is not to degrade me and defame me.
The word's usage is very complicated. It's an onion, and you have to peel the layers. And of course, it has to do with the source. Content means nothing without context. So what's the context? Right. Is it the officer that pulls you over? Because when the officer pulls you over and says the word like homie, like the officer just did in Philadelphia, well, that comes off worse than that in with the A or ER in the connotation. So it's all about the power and empowerment of the word itself.
Don Amici, I see you nodding in agreement.
Well, you know what's so funny is that I've never been able to wrap my head on how white people don't understand the difference between the GA and the ER, and it baffles me on that. There is totally different context depending on how you're using the ER and the GA. And the GA, I've never, unless a white person is saying in a demeaning way, but the GA for the most part has always been a term of endearment. But I always see a distinction between the two. The ER has never been flipped into a term of endearment. I've never wanted to say, hey, what's up, my nigger? I've never, even it's sounding like that, it sounds racist and it sounds demeaning, but the GA has been flipped through culture, through hip hop, and it's a term of endearment.
So then I have to ask you this, Don Amici, because at the beginning of the show, you were like, hey, use the word, do what you do. All right, I beg of you to take the word, make it yours. Do you now, are you now saying make it yours if it ends with an A, but don't make it yours if it ends in an ER?
Well, I know about myself. I'm not a nigga or a nigger. So, use it how you want. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm just talking in the context of how other people see it. You can call me whatever you want. I'm going to walk away from you. I'm not going to think anything less about myself. Only thing I'm going to know is be informed that you're prejudiced, racist, a bigot, and all of the above. So knock yourself out. The word doesn't mean anything to me because I am confident in who I am as an individual. I wish that we as a society can get away from it because a lot of people are hurt by the word, but that genie's out of the box, and to sit there and try to put it back and try to reform society and try to get them moving in a different generation, a different direction, I don't think that's going to happen.
Sam?
So, I mean, I'll have to borrow for some of Elizabeth Pryor's work from the University of Pennsylvania around resistance language and the politics of freedom. I would say that it's not just a word, that we, in the history of our nation and of this world, intent to dehumanize people is done through language, and it is not just a word. And so I think the question is, do people get a pass? It's a pass from whom? Because no white person can, and I think for all Black people listening to this, I think that white people use the N-word when they believe they have permission to do so. They use it freely and around Black people when they believe they have the permission to do so. And so I'm never going to give a white person, and I'm even going to go even further to say a Black person, the power to dehumanize or take my dignity away by referring to me by anything less than my name or sir, but I'm not going to be called the N-word with an ER or an A, period.
Attorney Clegg, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and nobody, and I'm not giving a pass out. So I think if we start giving passes out, then we have this issue that's going to persist with white people and other people using the N-word because they have gotten passes from Black people and others to do so.
Attorney Clegg, is the word okay for you to use?
It is not. And I think if we step back and really look at what other people do. For example, when I was growing up, and these are some words I would not otherwise use, but since we're having this conversation, I'd like to share them. They would refer to Japanese people as Japs, Mexicans as wetbacks, Italians as Dagos, Jews as kikes, etc. Most of our young people have never heard the words. They have no idea about those words because the people have enough self-respect not to dissect them and make portions of them acceptable, but to say, no, our ancestors were lynched behind that. Our grandmothers were raped behind that. We could not move in certain neighborhoods behind the use of those words. We had to drink out of certain water fountains because they referred to us in that way. Those people have enough respect not to sit and not to deliberate as to how it can be made pleasant. And what I'm saying is that is what I think should be a guide for us. Number one.
That is a huge point that Attorney Clegg is making here. Michael Jackson did the song They Don't Really Care About Us. Yes. And in the song, it does say, kick me, kike me. And the entire Jewish community came and said, you have to take that out of your song. And that is what he did. The record company, Sony, had to go back and take out all of those albums because the community demanded that they take it out, regardless of what Michael Jackson's intention was when he was using the word. And you're right. A lot of people probably don't know of those other derogatory terms that you spoke of, Attorney Clegg, because those communities had demanded that they not be used. So I ask then, Tehran, I'll take it to you. Why does the Black community not feel that way about the N-word?
Well, I have to put this out because, first of all, when we talk about the Jewish community, we're talking about a community of 15 million people in total. It's a lot easier to get 15 million people to streamline their community consciousness than the 40 million plus Black Americans, never mind the Black people in Africa and otherwise, but just Black Americans to all think the same. And this has always been my problem as a person who has degree on degree on degree. My problem with academia is that their hypothetical ideologies don't pertain to the masses. That's why people gravitate towards hip hop and not towards Mozart. It's about the masses. And as a community, we shouldn't be telling victims, because during victimization, you shouldn't be telling other victims how they should deal with their victimization. The get up, be stronger, and walk it off stance works for a certain amount of people, but not for everybody. And so because it hasn't worked for everybody, we have to be cognizant of the fact that that word, the word nigga, has been siphoned through the hip hop trend culture and has been siphoned down generationally. And even every time we say a word, we get a catalog of memories. And when Attorney Clegg and Sam Coleman say a word, it means something else than when I say the word. And I grew up in DC, right outside of DC's Virginia. And Virginia is so racist that not only was it a capital of the South, but there's a city called Blacksburg right next to Lynchburg. So we know about racism. The difference is we take it back in this way by empowering ourselves with a word that means more to us than to anyone else, and that we feel that we should have the only ability to say. And that's
but couldn't
what
the opposite be said, Tehran, when you say there are more Black people collectively than more Jewish people or more Hispanic people or more Japanese people? When you say there are more Black people, doesn't that mean that there are more of us to force the system not to use the word?
And I've always actually said this about the LGBTQ community. They've been extremely good at removing words that are derogatory towards them. And in fact, if we use the word nigga towards gay people, maybe it would have been removed, right? And my buddy Rel Battle says something very similar, like we collectively feel this way. But the difference is that's not how we distinguished it. We distinguished it because of the atrocities. We took this word back, and it wasn't the academia that did so. It was the masses. And now that it's happened, I love how Don Amici says, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That wish has already been granted. All we can do is think about it going forward and how we can be better at controlling it.
Well, I'm going to put this commercial genie, take it out of the bottle and put it into your streaming right now. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll come right back on the business of being Black. Welcome back to the business of being Black. I'm Tammi Mack. Hi there. So the business of being Black is, should we be using the N-word? Yeah, this conversation's been around a long time. Please welcome Public School District Director Sam Coleman, attorney and author LeGrand Clegg, television and radio personality Don Amici, and actor and comedian Tehran Von Gosri. Hello. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. So should Black people get mad when white folk call them the N-word, but they can call each other the N-word?
No. I mean, no. You know, if it boils down to what you think about yourself, if you don't believe that's what you are, no. And that you're trying to change somebody from being racist is not really going to happen.
But is it hypocritical, Sam? Is it hypocritical for some Black people to use the word, but then turn around and get mad if a white person calls them the word?
But one thing that I want to acknowledge is there is a double standard, and I would say an allowable double standard for how the use of the N-word is used in Black communities and by Black people, and then how we respond to or react to the N-word being used by other people. So whether we like it or not, there is a double standard there. I think, again, going back to what I understand about the power of words, if somebody calls me the N, I know who I am to my core. But I cannot say that I will not have an emotional and a psychological, and they will catch a physical reaction if somebody calls me, if a white person calls me the N-word. And it's not because I don't know who I am. It's that I have an opportunity to give a teachable lesson. And so
a teachable lesson, like a black eye, a right hook to the face. That's what it sounds like. You go
like that.
Attorney Clegg, is it hypocritical?
Well, it is, but on the other hand, you have to look at how our children have been reared and what they understand. A friend of mine is a teacher, and he was teaching at Westchester High School in Los Angeles County. And it's a predominantly white school, and the Black students have been called the N-word by some of the white students. And so they came to him as the preeminent Black on the campus and complained to him, and a white boy came with them, or one or two whites. And so they went back and forth. And so the whites looked at them and said, well, you call yourselves that word. And the teacher looked at them because he feels the same way I do. And the students were dumbfounded. But I really appreciate this interaction because I think we're enlightening each other. And I want, in this vein, I want to shed some light on an issue that came up. When I was growing up again, people did not, let me backtrack. If I drive down the street and stop my car, the car next to me, I'll hear NBW, all this negative language about Black people, especially Black women. But the N-word is forever. It's all there. It reminds me of something that I heard years ago when I attended the Congressional Black Caucus. I used to go every year. Matter of fact, I have a picture with Obama having been there. You have all the Black elected officials, et cetera. And they have workshops during the day. In the early 90s, the African Americans who host the conference were astounded by the degrading of language, the degradation language that was taking place among rappers. So they invited some rappers to speak. And because most of the people were my age, at the time, and they had never heard such language coming from our youth publicly. And so this young rapper got up and said, We met with the producers in Hollywood, and they said they are not going to finance conscious rap. They're going to finance gangster rap, and we can use whatever words we want, in terms of degrading ourselves. Whether we understand this or not, and I humbly present this, these white people in this country have an agenda for us, and we can embrace it in whatever way we choose. But please believe me, there's an agenda. And let me say this too: I'm an attorney. When I'm before a jury, or my colleagues are before a jury, trying to convince them of that a black person should be acquitted, in their minds are the N-word and all the other ways we're depicted in the media, and generally in a very, very negative light. We have to understand that while I do understand intra-group use of words for endearment, juries aren't all black, teachers aren't all black, politicians. I mean, we are in a world, in a country that has a history of hating us. And when we promote words they've used to degrade us, to me, it reflects self-destruction and a lack of self-respect, particularly when you contrast that to other people.
Well, that's interesting that you bring up the hip hop artist. In 1995, Tupac Shakur expressed his thoughts on the difference between using the ER versus the A. And so, he said that the ERs was the ones on the rope hanging out the thing. The A's is the ones with the gold ropes hanging out at clubs.
And
any thoughts on that?
That's an important distinction. When we go down to the hypocrisy of the N-word and people using it, when we keep bringing up the usage of terms of endearment, we all understand, instead of thinking, is it degrading? What about decency, right? So we all know that we call our significant others terms of endearment, baby, honey, and so forth, but we wouldn't think it respectful if someone who's a stranger did the same thing. If someone off the street came up to myself, if I'm with a girl and was like, hey, what's up, baby? Hey, honey, even though those are sweet terms, it would come off degrading and disrespectful. Well, that's the same thing with the word nigga. When I'm using it towards, it's a sense of familiarity. It's a sense of cultural closeness that I'm using it. It should be indecent for other people to want to use it. And we see this so many times. Everyone wants to be black until it's time to actually be black. Woo! Everyone wants to be black until it's time to actually be black. And that's why the usage is not hypocritical, it's hypothetical and ideological. And that's why it means so much generationally for us to use it, because that is the format in which we have already insisted on.
Attorney Clegg has a very good point. And me being in radio, as well as Don Amici being in radio here, we know how hip hop has infiltrated the culture, how it infiltrates the culture. And it's interesting to me that these white-owned radio conglomerates are so at ease using with rap music that use or will use the N-word, the B-word, and just completely have no regards for the content of the music. And I remember this doesn't happen much often, but there used to be mom and pop radio stations owned by Black people. Well, they came in and bought all of those out. So they barely exist. Don is on Tavis Smiley's radio station. I am on Stevie Wonder's radio station. However, the other, they are two radio stations that have Black owned, that watch the language that they put out to the Black community. But those conglomerates aren't so sensitive to that. So Attorney Clegg has a huge point when he says, could there be an agenda here, Sam?
Let's talk about that. So why is it that Black folks like Tavis Smiley and Stevie Wonder watch and have a standard for how language and the messaging in the language comes out of that platform? Like, there's a reason why Black people who have ownership and the ability to set a standard for that, there's a reason why they do. I would argue that Black people have not reclaimed the N-word through hip hop music. Black folks, and I'd even go all the way back to blackface when it was white people dressed as Black people with blackface, have been using the N-word on TV and through media for centuries. And when when white people were dressed in blackface using the N-word, of course, Black people saw themselves being caricaturized in blackface, using the N-word, behaving in certain ways. And then we ourselves in those times took on those same behaviors as our own. And that is not us, like it's not us. But when we see that displayed in the media, on TV, this is before music, but then also in music, when we see that displayed in those contexts and then begin to imitate and repeat that, I just think it's very interesting that our rationale for it is that we've taken ownership of it and repurposed it. I think we're repeating it. I disagree that we're repurposing anything. I don't find the N-word to be empowering in any way.
Is it empowering, Teron? Go ahead, Don.
And I think her name is C. Dolores Tucker.
Yes.
Back in the day, she steamrolled over rap records, and I really didn't understand it as a kid. As an adult, I understand it a lot more. I think hip hop music, street hip hop music, I should say, is more detrimental to our young Black youths out there by dumbing down and de-elevating language and not really elevating or uplifting our Black culture. And there is an agenda when it comes to these music executives on why they want to put that out there. It's not because the Black audience is buying it, but it's a massive white audience that they're also trying to attract that's in love with Black culture. And they love to hear the N-word. They love to hear the rapping about guns and selling dope and all that other stuff. To wrap this up, if we want to get rid of the N-word, we just have to stop using it at the end of the day, because once we stop using it, the people who follow us to try to be like us will stop using it because they see we stop using it.
Man,
but you don't. Go ahead, Attorney Clegg.
In that vein, I had meant to mention this a minute ago when we were talking about the other groups. I'll never forget, it's been a while, and some of you younger people may remember it. There was a young Jewish fellow who called himself Kike on the mic. Now, the word kike is what they used in Nazi Germany, and we don't use it here, of course, which to degrade them and to exterminate them and so forth. Those producers had removed him immediately. And that should tell us something. Why would the producers be so sensitive about that, but allow the Blacks to use the N-word, which brought about lynchings and all this other stuff? We need to be, and I'm not, please understand, though I'm older and an attorney, I don't believe that, I know everything.
You're not an old fogey. You get your groove onto the cha-cha slide every now and again.
You're right. But I humbly ask you, see, if you look at others, because we constantly say, well, they have the Jewish businesses in Koreatown and all these people, of course, they have deliberately kept us from that. And fortunately, Common put out something when we were talking about the destruction of Black Wall Street. He said, look at all the other massacres. Common actually put out a map and showed it. So we have a very different history. But I'm begging you to look at the successes in other groups and see how they rear their children, the language that is used toward them, how people describe them, how they respect them. We have the most ancient history in the world. The ancient Egyptians were Black Africans, and they laid the foundation of civilization. The pyramids, they still can't replicate. But we're viewed in the world as basically in a very negative light. We need to correct that for our children. And using the N-word is not moving us in that direction.
Ooh, we'll talk about that when we return on The Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. Hello, everybody. The Business of Being Black today is the N-word. The N-word. When you think about the glamorization of hip hop and rap music in mainstream culture, have Black people given away our right to be the only ethnic group who can use the word? Are we responsible for giving that word to everybody? Sam?
I like what Don said, and that was, if we want to see the word being used less, then we just need to stop using it. I think that we definitely carry a sense of responsibility and accountability within the Black community for the words that we use. And I'll use this, in a positive. I refer to students in my school district and other schools I've worked at as young kings and young queens, if they allow me to do so. And I have noticed how that has changed the culture and the perception of their identity when young men and young women who are identifying their gender as such carry themselves and respond to being called a young king and a young queen. So that's a word. And I know Black people call each other kings and queens. And again, I don't hear that in white communities. I've never heard a white person call another white person a king or queen, but we do. And I love to see it. I love to see it. So I think we want to talk about words that are empowering and endearing and have an impact in positive ways. A better choice to go and a better route to go that we can take ownership of is referring to each other as kings and queens, as Attorney Clegg just talked about our history and what our history dates back to.
But Attorney Clegg also mentioned some hip hop artists at a conference he went to that said, hey, they won't play our records if we call ourselves king and queens. They won't distribute our music if we call ourselves kings and queens. So can we just keep calling ourselves the N-word and B's and hoes and, because we're trying to sell these records. Has the N-word become a word to you, a word of commerce?
Ooh.
So we play by those rules. One thing I love about JayZ and Beyonce is, and I know that they are not the same as a lot of other entertainers, but they are not playing by the rules. And I think that they set an example for, there are rules if you want to sell records and you want to be profitable and you want to do what everybody else is doing. But I would caution for entertainers who go into that, they are so easily replaceable. Like you play by the rules and play by the rules until you feel like you don't, and then you will be replaced. But we also have entertainers and thought leaders, and I use JayZ and Beyonce as an example, who don't play by those rules, and they're not necessarily beholden to what the record labels and companies who have a white interest in mind, what they have to say about their music. So I think there's examples out there we can point to of people who choose to not play by those rules, and they're doing all right.
Well, I don't know that JayZ is the best example, because most of his career, he used the N-word. And he's only done a couple of albums since he's been the billionaire JayZ. So I think it was the N-word that perhaps got him to the point of where he is. And that's why I ask, is it a word of commerce now, Don?
It is, but today is different. No longer do you need the record company or the producers or whatever to sit there and make a living through music. Matter of fact, there's so many artists that are coming up that are just making it on their own by putting their own music out and building a following online through streaming platforms. So the gatekeeper that may have requested that is becoming obsolete. And so if we collectively as a community, come together and say, let's get the N-word out of music, out of culture, out of movies, I think it'll fade away. And we can do that because we control the means of distribution and our own music at this point in time. But there has to be a collective effort. And the problem is that we are only united by trauma. We're not united as far as trying to force politicians to do things for us.
That's good.
And we're all over the place. I was talking about this the other day, that Black people like church more than they want revolution. And, and it's a sad thing, because I wish we all were on the same page as far as how calling each other kings and queens, because that's a predominantly Black thing, or even, coming up with a hashtag of get the N out. And anytime you feel like you need to use the N word, replace it, king, queen, brother, you know what I'm saying? Family, and try to keep the word positive. But I don't know if we have the fortitude to do that, or the will to do that, or the want.
Yeah, it may be the want may be a little problematic, but Tehran, I see you nodding.
It has a lot to do with the divisive nature of academia or elite Black society with mainstream Black America. And that also causes a problem. It's, if we get hip hop artists on board, then maybe there's a chance, because that is the music of the masses. But when a Reggie Jackson or an Al Sharpton or even a Sam Coleman tells us, and in such a way, we don't want to listen to that necessarily. And while I respect you, Sam, completely, I'm saying this for the mainstream simply because of the way it comes off. The way it comes off, especially if you're in LA, you'll know there's a Baldwin Hills mentality that goes against that Compton neighborhood mentality. And there's a clash within our own community in that regards. And what Don Amici said about us being united in trauma is a huge thing that we should look at. We should also take for account, we use words like boy all the time, but if someone says it with a negative connotation, it is detrimental. And while we started using king and queen lately, I hear white people calling Black people king and queen. I've heard that a lot more as it goes forward. So there is, and what we learn in law school is there's a slippery slope we have to all be aware of.
It's interesting as you all talk. It sounds like Black culture really fuels what the rest of the world does.
Absolutely.
More than anything,
Absolutely.
more than anything, Black culture fuels everything that happens in pop culture and trend more than anything. Such a small group of people have had such an profound impact on the rest of the world, whether it's hairstyles, body types, language usage, music, everything. Don't forget that in 1989, Will Smith as Fresh Prince wasn't allowed on stage at the Grammys because hip hop was not okay for America. And now when you watch the Grammys, it's basically just the Hip Hop Source Awards.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting that although we propel the culture forward, and I don't mean the Black culture, I mean even mainstream, we don't get paid for it. We still don't get paid for it. I was, you know how you Google and you just scroll and you go into Google hell. I was Googling the other day, slave articles where, slaves were being sold, that had advertisements of slaves being sold or advertisements for looking for runaway slaves. And these articles were on Etsy and eBay selling for like $2,000 and $800. And I'm like, to this day, we are still being profited, or people are still profiting from our slavery, from us being slaves. It was just amazing to me because I'm like, $2,000 for an article about a runaway slave? Are you kidding me? And that particular slave descendants will get none of that money, not a drop or dime. Attorney Clegg, what do you got in this conversation? Is the N-word self-destruction?
Okay, well, I believe that, yes. But I'm learning so much from these young people. I just feel it's a blessing to be here. And there's so much I'd like to say about what has been said. One is that when you made the comment about slavery, the other day I had to make a presentation someplace, and a friend of mine brought to my attention that there was a slave named Onesimus, and I don't know if you know about. He's the one who introduced the idea of vaccine. He told his master that he was not going to get smallpox because in Africa they would take the pus from someone who had the disease, put a suture, cut a person who didn't have it, and put it in that person's vein or skin, and that would give them immunity. And finally, they realized that it was real, and so that's what gave rise to the vaccine. I mean, there's so many things we've done that we don't know about. I just wanted to connect up with what you just said. The next one I want to raise is that we have had success in terms of, because of our being such great consumers. 25 years ago, Larry Elders was a horrendous presence on radio. We began a boycott of his sponsors, just writing every week. And I mean, at one point, KBC Radio had no banks, no supermarkets, no airlines behind what Black people did. We can go back to that, just like Dr. King did.
Yeah. I want to go back to the rappers a little bit, because rapper Fat Joe, who is of Puerto Rican descent, has a history of using the N-word. But during his versus battle with Ja Rule, his uses of the N-word sparked a heated debate. So should Fat Joe get a pass? I've always remembered Fat Joe using the N-word. So I'm a little confused with where the heat came from. Do we know, Teron?
Well, the heat came from the recent awareness and the new woke culture that has encompassed Black America, especially young, generationally Black people like myself. We're much more aware and sensitive to things. The concept of a Fat Joe is there was a whole group of young people that didn't really know who Fat Joe was. They didn't know his stripes and where he came from enough to allow him to use that word. In the 2000s, people probably would have never questioned it. But in 2021, a 14-year-old is like, who's Fat Joe? He's too light and too not Black to say this word. And it makes a lot of sense.
Sam?
I think, there's people of color along the diaspora who would have been a certain skin complexion or would have had a certain accent. It just depends on where the ship stopped. And so I don't necessarily, if somebody's from Brazil or Haiti or wherever, like the use of the N-word among people of color, when I think about just the origin of the word, it's relating to, in its original context, dealing with people of color. I just think it really depends on where the ship stopped or where folks were let off along the diaspora around their complexion and their accent. But the N-word used among people of color, to me, is not the same. And it's what I talked about earlier today as being this allowable double standard. But I will say this quickly. Eugene Robinson's work around disintegration, I think, hits the nail on the head, where there's Black culture, but we don't have a Black community where all of us have a singular experience and we are all on the same page. We all are impacted by something the same way. There is a ton of factors that go into why we're not a Black community. We're a community of Black people with a wide range of agendas and stances and positions. And because this is one of the topics, a word created and brought into our culture by white people, this is one of the things that I do believe Black folks will never agree on. And it's not ironic to me that it's about something that don't even belong to us. That word is not our word. But this is the thing that I think we'll never agree on when it comes to removing the word from our culture and community or not. And Eugene Robinson's work around disintegration, to me, speaks to why we are just on completely different pages with different perspectives.
Let's take a quick break and come right back on Business of Being Black. Back to Business of Being Black. I'm Tammi Mack. The N-word is the business of being Black today. And the question is, because we've done a lot of talk about whether it should be used, whether it shouldn't be used, has it moved us forward? Has the N-word propelled Black people forward in any way?
I'm gonna
Well,
say
it
no.
made JayZ a billionaire. Other than that,
Yeah,
Okay.
he's a long way from Jigga, my nigga.
exactly. Let's not forget JayZ. Let's not forget that JayZ. It's not, and I want to make this very clear. I don't disagree with anyone on this panel. I agree with Attorney Clegg. I agree with Sam Coleman. I agree with them both. They are correct. But just because you're correct doesn't always mean you're right. We are at this point now. And because we're here now, we can only do damage control of what it is now. And my idea is that I don't want to live in a world where I can't say the word nigga. I want to live in a world where people don't want to say it. And there's a difference.
There's a difference. Sam,
I-
has it propelled us?
No, I don't think it has propelled us forward in any way. But I do like that we are beginning to call each other kings and queens. And I certainly see that being a confidence booster and a form of identity engineering within Black culture that we could be proud of.
Yeah. Attorney Clegg, has the N-word propelled us forward?
It has not. And I want to say, with respect to Mr. Coleman, I appreciate his saying, referring to kings and queens. When the King Tut exhibit was here, for example, we presented evidence, DNA and evidence, everything to show that he was Black and that his whole dynasty was. And we took children out to see it. Another point I'd like to make is, while it is true that we imagine having strata in our group, different levels and elites and all that, white people view us as a whole. So if I'm walking down the street with 10 rappers and 2 doctors, you're just dealing with 10 N-word, okay? And so that's what we need to understand. We are a collective, whether we understand that internally or not. And we need to, and I appreciate what Tehran said, we should try to bridge those gaps and understand how each of bridge across generations, etc., and class, so-called class, because the white masses trump all of it. They do not view us as distinguished. When it comes to it, just like when they attacked the Capitol, they would attack us in the same way, not caring about whether I'm an attorney, someone else is a rapper, another is a doctor, etc. So
Attorney Clegg, let's get to your project. Why do white people hate us so much? Where can we find that article?
Oh, it's online, and and they hate us because there is a recollection of our having dominated, conquered, stoned, etc. them in antiquity.
Of course.
Ancient Egyptians, the Moors.
Sam, you're a public school district director. Talk about it. How are they doing in the schools?
So the school district where I lead is predominantly white. We're at almost 80% white. And so it's a mess when I think about, or it could be a mess, I'm sorry, if I think about what would happen if white folks in this district were saying, like, we need a pass to use this word. And so what I appreciate in Wisconsin is being one of the most segregated, Milwaukee being one of the most segregated cities in this nation, I appreciate that our school districts are taking a stance about language that's affirming. Because if in the school district where I serve, if this were an issue, and maybe it is, and I don't know about it yet, but if this were an issue, we wouldn't even be able to deal with academics, because when the race bomb blows up in a school, it's different than when it is with adults. When the race bomb blows up in schools among young people, somebody, your brother earlier talked about damage control. Like literally, that's all that can be done is damage
Don
control.
Amici, your show, Don Amici versus Everybody, where can we hear it?
Just download the KBLA app from the Google Play Store, Apple App Store. On the cover of sweetlifesocal.com. Got to cover the magazine this month with Tavis Smiley and, with the future of Black Talk Radio.
And Tehran, where can we see you next, my brother?
You can find me making audiences laugh, bringing people together, and making white people uncomfortable on stages all across the country. And every Thursday night at the Laugh Factory, where it's Tehran Thursdays. Come out and join the fun.
You got it. And thank you all for having this discussion on business of being Black. Don Amici, Tehran, Sam, and Attorney Clegg. Until next time, it's a blessing to be in your box. Bye, everybody.